Lovely to be here with you today, Helen. I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your position here in Fielding, and we'll go on from there.
Great, Talofa. Great to be able to talk to you. So, yes, this is my third trainee as Mayor. I came into council completely fresh as the Mayor in 2016. Prior to that, I had managed a group called Fielding Promotion, and our role was to put life back into Fielding. Fielding was a typical dying rural town. Our shoppers were disappearing over to the bright lights of the city, and so I managed a group of volunteers. We had about 100 volunteers to put life back into Fielding and the district, which we did successfully, and I spent 20 years doing that and went to have a break and then got told, come on, you need to put your name forward. So I did, and here I am.
That's amazing. And to think now what Fielding looks like now in comparison to when you first started, it's definitely life here.
Well, it is, but it's a bit like your house and garden. You know, you get it all nice, but then as time moves on, you need to refresh it. Yeah. So we're at the stage now as a council. We have a town centre refresh plan that we're starting to implement and work through. So the town looks tired now because our earthquake-prone buildings.
Right.
We've got 90 earthquake-prone buildings just in our town centre.
That's amazing.
And the community told us that Edwardian heritage is really important, and they want to save as many as we can.
Oh wait, you actually listen to the people?
Absolutely.
Oh.
We're here to serve them.
This is refreshing.
That's our job.
Okay.
And I totally support them. So we've been lobbying government really hard on earthquake-prone buildings too, and it's still a problem. We've had about 12 buildings strengthened, but our challenge is our big buildings like the big Fielding Hotel in the middle of town. In provincial New Zealand, there is just not the return on investment needed to put into these buildings. So we're trying as a council to, how can we incentivise through the district plan, make sure the rules, for example, allow accommodation on the first floor so that these buildings have some use, so they can get some investment. But we really need the government to step up with us again now, and the time frames, we're on about 5 years now on our priority thoroughfares, so and 5 years is just going to come so fast, and we're going to have landlords turning up at the counter and saying, here's the keys to my building. And the legislation says that the council is then supposed to demolish those buildings.
Right.
And send the bill to the building owner, but they don't have the wherewithal to fund it either. So we need the government, if the government's serious about preserving heritage, they need to work with us to find a way to do it.
Do you think that's will be the same issues with every other sort of council around?
Absolutely.
Earthquake prone?
Yeah, wherever there are earthquake prone buildings, neighbouring councils here, Ringatiki, Wanganui, Tararua, Palmerston North, all got the same problem. So we were successful. We went to the then Minister of Building, and they did tweak the law to give some tax relief to building owners. But now the issue is timeframes, and Wellington's timeframes run out the year before ours. So we're watching and waiting. What's Wellington going to do?
Because Wellington obviously is the capital city, and
well,
they should be forging ahead with a lot more.
Yeah, but you look at their beautiful heritage buildings. So many of them, the businesses have just closed up and walked away. I was in Wellington last week, Courtney Place. There's some beautiful buildings there, and they've just walked away. And we can't afford that to happen in provincial New Zealand. Our town would just die.
No, that's right. So tell me, could you give us a little bit of, or give us, the audience, a little bit of an idea as to when you first heard about Three Waters, because that's quite a big issue at the moment, and people want to know more about it because they're only getting one side of the story about Three Waters. And I would love to hear just how you came to find out about it and what you've done about it so far.
So Three Waters is part of a raft of reforms that central government's throwing at local government. we had to set up a separate focus group just to manage all the reforms that are coming through. At last count, we had about 120 something reforms or reviews that government was expecting local councils on behalf of their community to make submissions on. And we're not resourced to do that, no council is.
Yeah.
So we've had to go through them all and go, what are the key ones that are important to our community, and what are the ones that our time and effort may have impact. Three Waters by default, because the government chose to bring that one out as the lead reform, our view was that the future for local government should have been number one. If as a country we had said this is what we want councils to do or not do in the future, once we'd agreed on that, then we could have talked about Three Waters and RMA reform and all the others, but the government's decided to do Three Waters and RMA before that, before future for local government. So and it just, it's a big topic, and for us, we went out, the government said to us, don't consult with your community, we'll consult later. And this was 2021. And we thought, no, this is important. The community have funded infrastructure. So we engaged, not consulted, with our community and said the government's planning to... well, the other problem, the biggest problem that kicked all this off was we lost trust with central government.
Yeah.
They said, you need reform, we agree, you need reform in Three Waters, but they said, here's a model, like 97% of those who replied, and we had a fantastic response, one of the highest responses we've had from the community, to say, don't let them take our assets off us.
Right.
We've paid for them, we've invested in them. So when I got talking to a number of councils, we discovered that Local Government New Zealand, our membership organisation, had already signed an agreement with the government not to oppose their model. And they didn't ask their
without
members.
any permission.
Yeah. So a group of mayors, we got talking, and with Dan Gordon, the mayor of Waimakariri, we said, okay, let's see if there's a willingness between the ones we know about. So right at the start, it was 9 mayors who got together and and we said, well, we talked to LGNZ, and we said, hang on, you have to represent the views of all your members. But they'd already signed that agreement with government. So we set up Communities for Local Democracy. We have a website, we have a Facebook page, so
we'll add that at the end of this article.
So it's Communities for, the number 4, Local Democracy.
Okay,
all
sure.
one word.
Thank you.
So we set that up, and then we ended up with 33 members. We lost a couple along the way with Ngāi Tahu in the South Island. We're very, very strong, and said to number of councils such as Queenstown, Dunedin and Christchurch, if you don't pull out of Communities for Local Democracy, we'll remove our relationship with you.
Really?
And which is a real shame. We tried to get in front of them and talk to them, but they weren't interested. They had their views about who we were, and we got called a bunch of racist and National Party supporters and all this kind of stuff.
If they can label you, then they can justify themselves in the way that they treat you.
So we ended up with a core group of 31 councils. We agreed that we would not go out and investigate and talk about the iwi part of it, because that wasn't what we were there for. We are fundamental, and we still are, opposed to the government taking our Three Waters infrastructure assets off us with no compensation, because there's no compensation for the investment our community has made. And under the government's model, there is no local decision-making voice in the model that they've set up. And also under the government's model, they're saying, well, we're going to take your assets, but not only will you pay for your assets under the standards and under our decision-making, you will also support the funding for the others within the entity. And in Manawatu's case, we're going, hang on a minute, the DIA said our infrastructure exceeds expectations. That's what their words were. But you take people like Palmerston North City, who are looking at about an $800 million investment needed into wastewater. Our ratepayers are going, wait a minute, we've invested in ours, we've got state-of-the-art infrastructure, but we're now going to have all that taken off us, no compensation, no decision making for the future, and we're going to have to help pay for the city. But then there are other communities like Queenstown, Ruape, who geographically have a really big area of land, but a very small ratepayer base. And so those kind of communities genuinely need help to invest to get their infrastructure up to standard. So we all came together and we agreed on a small fee per council to put into a budget. We contracted Malcolm Alexander, who was the previous CE for Local Government New Zealand, a very smart man with a legal background. And we went to the government and said, please give us time to come up with alternatives to show you that we want reform, and B, we can achieve what you're wanting without taking assets off us.
Yeah.
So we did that. We spent the summer of 2021-22 and we presented to the Ministerial Working Party in January 2022.
Who was that? Do you
Pardon?
know? Who was the minister? Do you remember?
Manaia Mahuta was the Minister of Local Government at that time. But they had a Ministerial Working Party. We presented to them. We've met several times with all of the political parties, including New Zealand First, Maori Party, ACT, Greens, Labour and National. We've met with them all many times. And we've been able to prove with the work that Castalia did, who are international infrastructure experts, we were able to prove to the government that we can actually get the reform that is needed without you telling us how to do it.
Right.
So we only needed three things from the government, and we still only need three things. We need the rules and the standards, which we have under Te Mata ROI. So we support that because that's your standards. Up until now, the Ministry of Health, they haven't really been strong in making sure that we all achieve these standards. So we need the rules. We need some funding assistance for communities who genuinely need help to bring it up to the standard we need. And then we need backstop enforcement. So that's the government saying, here's the rules, here's the financial assistance, because rates by themselves won't fund us. We have to find smarter ways of doing it. And the issue at the moment is the Crown has no intention of investing into this. They're saying we'll set up the entities and then the entities will borrow and then the ratepayer, taxpayer will pay for all of that. So, but in our view, the government has to step up. And if you think of, they've spent $94 million as at December on getting to this stage in the reform. Imagine if that money had been invested into 2 or 3 small communities. Their infrastructure would have been fixed by now.
That's right.
So that backstop enforcement would have said, here's the rules, here's the funding, you must achieve this by X time, and if you don't, we'll come in and take over. That's all we needed.
Right.
We didn't need government to say, this is how it's going to work.
So what was their response when you presented them with things that made sense to them?
Well, ACT and National both agreed that one size fits none, that councils should have the flexibility to either come up with if they're brave enough to think that they can achieve this reform on their own, and some councils may, including ours, or they may choose to partner with their neighbours or as a region to come up with it. But they agreed with us that it should not be the government saying one size fits everybody, because that just doesn't work. So we have had many meetings with Minister Mahuta when she was Minister of Local Government, and to be fair, didn't really get very far. We were told, we've looked at your alternatives, but they won't work. And we said, but hang on, get your officials to sit down with us and explain why they won't work.
Yeah.
We've commissioned some infrastructure experts to show you that we can achieve the outcomes you want, but you're just prepared to say they won't work. But why won't they work? Let's have that discussion.
Yeah.
And talked about balance sheet separation, some of these things, and we've shown you how they work in all of those issues that they raised. And the government continued under Mahuta to say, but some councils don't want reform. That's not what we were saying at all. We were saying, absolutely, we need reform, but don't tell us how to do it.
Right.
Set the rules and let us decide how to do it.
So from this point on, Helen, we've got an election coming up at the end of this year. What can people do to at least, you've presented to government, they've pretty much poo-pooed what you've actually said. People like myself and the public don't actually know any of this, which I'm hoping they'll be able to have an understanding. What can they do? What can people do?
Well, unfortunately, it has become an election issue, and I have to say, when Kieran McNulty he came in as the local government minister replacing Manawa Mahuta, he did listen, and we did have conversations with him. But he pointed out that he was under a deadline from the caucus and from the Prime Minister. His job was to come up with what this reform was actually going to look like. So we had some small wins along the way, and then the last review was they went from 4 entities to 10. But what we couldn't understand is they said, oh, well, you'll be happy now because we've agreed to go from 4 entities to 10. And we're going, but you're still taking our assets with no compensation and no local voice. We had 3 councils in New Zealand, Whangarei, Waimakariri and Timaru, who took the government to court, took out a high court case asking for a determination on property rights. Because if you read the law about property rights, it says if I take something off you, I have to compensate you. But the government's not doing this. So we won that court case, which said that yes, that is correct. That is how the law is. How that is determined. The problem was the government had already put the first bill through, so compensation was optional for the government's decided not to. They have this view that because we have a seat on the entity, we still own the assets. But
wait, does that mean that the government is above the law?
The bill had already gone through, so the answer is yes. The answer is yes. So unfortunately, it means that it is now going to become an election issue, and I say to people, people go, oh, it's really complicated, but I say to them, it's not. It's actually really simple. If I say to you, I'm going to take your house off you, you'll still own it, but you'll have no say about what you do with it. We will tell you what you're going to do with it. And by the way, we're going to take your neighbour's house as well. And by the way, you're going to help subsidise what's needed for your neighbour's house. And that's in very simple terms what this government's model is about. And the concerns that councils like us have, because our infrastructure is in a good position, we're in high growth, a number of councils around the country are, we're needing to talk about what next. How do we grow what we've already got? And the fear under the entity model is they'll say, whoa, growth's on the back burner. We need to get every council up to the same level, and then we'll talk about growth. And the concern around that is that we're then being penalised for having done the work and not being able to grow. And at the end of the day, it's like the government wants us to all be the same. We need communities are about having a point of difference. Why would someone come and live here or bring a business here if we're all going to end up being the same?
I have heard of a model where you will own nothing and be happy.
Well, if you look across this current government, everything they've touched, policing, health, education, it is a one-size-fits-all approach. It's okay, the government will look after you.
And how do you think that's working for our country?
It's not. It's falling down everywhere. So 3 Waters was just the banner that that I jumped on board because it was about the principle of this. So it doesn't matter whether it's 3 waters, policing, education, health. The principle's the same.
Right.
And if you look at successful communities around the world, their governance model is completely opposite to us. The power is, I believe that the decision making should be as close to the people who are affected by those decisions.
Yeah.
In other words, let communities decide. Give them a framework, give them the resourcing that you need to do it, and let them get on with it.
I think that's exactly what I think they need to hear in the Hawke's Bay. They keep promising a whole lot of money for the infrastructure. They are desperate there.
The Hawke's Bay and the 3 Waters space had already done a lot of work as a region. They'd already decided the best way for us in 3 Waters infrastructure is to do it as a region. So they had a model signed off by iwi, supported by iwi, to go. So under the National Party, their policy, they're saying we will set the framework and the standards and the funding. You come and tell us how you want to do it. So regions like Hawke's Bay, prior to the cyclone, were all ready to get going. But I totally agree. The people impacted, like Hawke's Bay and the cyclone, they just need some decisions to get on with their lives.
They do.
And why is that so hard?
Well, there's quite a few of the ministers that have stepped down, there. So they basically are in a shambles. They actually need someone like you, forging the way.
Yeah, but also the little bit of research that I did about the Hawke's Bay situation. Yeah. In 1938, the exact same weather event happened. And the Esk Valley was totaled. And when you looked at the stats that the media put out back then, similar deaths, similar destruction, just chaos. And you go, but you let it all happen again. You let people go back and build.
Yeah, it was actually funny. I was just saying that to my husband today. I said to him, what happens if they rebuild again and not actually deal with why it happened in the first place? And
if you look at the history of the Esk Valley, my understanding is the government of the day did say or the council did say, no, we're not going to let you rebuild there. And a developer challenged them and won because the rules and the law of the day were not current with what they should have been. So the law said, we can't stop you. So they went ahead and developed, and now we're back in the same situation.
Wow.
So
that's really
let's hope that we learn from that this time.
Is there anything you want to say to the people of Auckland, or the people who are listening to this, for going forward? Be part of council meetings, be present there.
Well,
do you think, or just be more aware?
Get engaged. And the bit that I think is sad for the country is that things like 3 Waters are now an election issue. Yeah. And in the meantime, there's handouts here and there by whichever party promising to do things, and people are really busy in their day-to-day lives, with family, with work, and with all the COVID dramas, etc. And so they only kind of remember the last few things. We got a handout for early childhood, or winter payments, or whatever it is. But think about the big picture. Think about some of these big things that long term are going to cost us. And the other thing that people forget is that the ratepayer and the taxpayer are the same person.
Yes.
And some people go, no, that's okay, the taxpayer will pay. And you go, but isn't that you?
Yeah, that's right.
You're the ratepayer too. And as taxpayers, we can spread the load more, but we're still going to pay. And the other piece around 3 Waters is, how can you lift the standards in something and say it will be cheaper than what we currently do?
You can't.
It makes no sense.
No.
It's going to be more expensive. But again, do we need a gold-plated model, or do we just need to lift the bar a little bit?
Yeah, that's right. I'm feeling that there'll be a lot more questions to ask you heading towards the election if you're open and available for some of these. But I just want to say thank you so much for your time. Just you have so much knowledge in this, and actually it's probably a clearer picture now for people to look at Three Waters and go, oh, this is what it's about, like the core issues rather than what it's become and how the media has portrayed it.
Absolutely, and I just encourage people, go to the website. You know, everything that we've done is there.
Okay.
Or, you know, if you're into all the technical stuff, it's there. If you just want the overview, it's there as well.
Okay.
And we're more than happy to talk to anybody.
Thank you so much for your time.
No problem. Cheers.
Thank you.